The Spartans. 300 men stood against an empire. They were Spartans, the most feared warriors the ancient world had ever known. For 3 days at Thermopylae in 480 BC, these soldiers held the narrow pass against 150,000 Persian invaders. By the time the last Spartan fell, the ground was soaked with the blood of 20,000 enemy dead. But Sparta did not create warriors overnight. They built them from childhood. At age 7, Spartan boys were torn from their mothers and thrown into the agoge, a brutal training system designed to forge human weapons. They learned to endure cold, hunger, and pain. They slept on beds of reeds, fought with their fists, survived by theft and cunning. Those who failed were abandoned. Those who succeeded became hoplites at age 20, spending the next decade living in military barracks with no family, no comfort, and no purpose beyond war. On the battlefield, Spartans fought in the phalanx formation, overlapping bronze shields, 2.5-meter spears thrust forward as one. An iron wall of discipline that never broke, never retreated, never surrendered. Historians estimate that a Spartan phalanx could defeat forces 3 times its size through sheer coordination and morale alone. But the system that made them invincible also destroyed them. Sparta demanded perfection. Weak infants were left on mountainsides to die. Only pure-blooded citizens could become warriors. The population remained microscopic while their enemies multiplied. When Thebes shattered the phalanx at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, killing 400 Spartans in a single afternoon, Sparta never recovered. There were simply no more warriors left to train. The eugenics that created the perfect soldier eventually made that soldier extinct. Perfection is not sustainable. The Persian Immortals. An army that could not die. The Achaemenid Empire called them the Immortals. 10,000 elite guards who formed the backbone of Persian military power. Their name came from a terrifying innovation. Whenever a warrior fell in battle, he was replaced immediately. The unit always numbered exactly 10,000, always. To their enemies, it seemed as though the Immortals could not be killed. Cut down one soldier and another materialized in his place. The psychological impact was devastating. They were recruited from across the empire based on merit, not bloodline. Armed with scale armor that deflected arrows, wicker shields reinforced with leather, deadly composite bows, and short spears designed for rapid strikes. They conquered Babylon, Egypt, and Asia Minor, spreading Persian rule across 3 continents. But immortality was an illusion. At the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC, Greek hoplites tore through Persian lines like paper. The Immortals wore lightweight armor designed for mobility, not close-quarters brutality. Their wicker shields shattered against bronze. Their short spears broke against the longer Greek sarissas. They died in waves. When Alexander the Great crushed the Persian Empire 2 centuries later, the Immortals fell just as easily as any mortal soldier. The system ensured their numbers never changed, but it could not ensure their weapons matched their enemies. Reputation cannot stop steel. The Roman Legionaries. Rome was not built by emperors. It was built by men who could march 30 kilometers carrying 40 kilograms and then build a fortified camp before nightfall. The Roman legionary was not a warrior. He was an engineer, a builder, a machine of discipline, who served 25 years and conquered the known world through superior organization. Each soldier wore lorica segmentata armor, carried a scutum shield, wielded the short stabbing gladius, and threw the pilum javelin that bent on impact so enemies could not throw it back. But their real weapon was not metal. It was structure. Legions were divided into cohorts, cohorts into centuries, centuries into squads. Every unit operated independently, yet moved as one. The testudo formation turned soldiers into a walking fortress, shields locked overhead and on all sides. On the march, legionaries constructed fortified camps every single night, complete with ditches, walls, and gates. Historians estimate that Rome controlled 5 million square kilometers at its peak, all held by men who valued engineering as much as combat. But efficiency has a cost. Training a legionary required years. Equipping them drained the treasury. As Rome expanded, citizen recruitment could no longer fill the ranks. The empire hired barbarians, mercenaries, men with no loyalty to Rome itself. By the 3rd century AD, legions had splintered into private armies loyal to generals, not the Senate. The system that built an empire fragmented into warlords fighting over the ruins. The legions did not fall to a superior force. They fell because Rome could no longer afford to pay them. Even the best soldiers need a state to serve. The Mubarizun. Before the armies clashed, a single rider would emerge. The Mubarizun were the champions of medieval Islamic warfare, elite duelists who challenged enemy commanders to single combat before the battle began. Mounted on Arabian war horses, clad in full armor, wielding lance and sword, they rode into the gap between armies and called out their challenge. If the enemy accepted, the duel decided morale. If their champion fell, his army often broke and fled before a single formation engaged. At the Battle of Yarmouk in 636 AD, Islamic champions shattered Byzantine morale through a series of devastating duels. The psychological warfare was as effective as any cavalry charge. But it relied on one critical assumption: honor. The Mubarizun expected their enemies to fight fairly, face to face, one-on-one. But as warfare evolved, honor became a liability. Crossbows did not care about single combat. Muskets did not wait for challenges. By the 16th century, a champion on horseback was just a target. The age of personal glory died the moment gunpowder made killing impersonal. The Mubarizun vanished not because they lost duels, but because no one bothered to duel them anymore. Technology erases tradition. War elephants. Imagine seeing a tank for the first time. Now imagine it is alive and unstoppable. War elephants were the ancient world's ultimate shock weapon. Armored beasts weighing 5 tons, fitted with bronze blades on their tusks, carrying archers on their backs. They originated in India and spread across empires. Carthage used them against Rome, Persia deployed them against Greece. Alexander the Great faced them at the Battle of Hydaspes in 326 BC and watched his cavalry scatter in terror. A single elephant could trample dozens of soldiers, crush formations, and spread panic across an entire battlefield. Historians estimate that at Hydaspes, Porus commanded 200 elephants against Alexander's 40,000 troops. The casualties were catastrophic. Soldiers who stood their ground were crushed. Those who fled were hunted down. But elephants had one critical flaw: fear. Set an elephant on fire and it panics. Panicked elephants do not distinguish between friend and enemy. They rampage through their own lines, crushing the soldiers they were meant to protect. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, Roman troops opened corridors in their formation and let Carthaginian elephants charge through harmlessly. Then they set them ablaze. The elephants turned and stampeded back through Hannibal's army, destroying his cavalry before Rome even drew swords. War elephants dominated until their enemies learned to weaponize their own terror. The strongest weapon can become the greatest liability. The Vikings. On June 8, 793 AD, the monastery at Lindisfarne burned. From the sea came warriors who spoke no Latin, worshipped no Christian god, and showed no mercy. The Vikings had arrived. For the next 273 years, Scandinavian raiders terrorized Europe, not through superior tactics, but through superior mobility. Their longships could cross oceans, navigate rivers, and be dragged overland when necessary. While European armies marched slowly along roads, Vikings struck deep inland with devastating speed. They raided England, established trade routes across Russia, settled Iceland and Greenland, and reached North America 500 years before Columbus. At their peak, Vikings controlled Normandy, dominated Ireland, and extracted tribute from kingdoms that could not stop them. But they were raiders, not rulers. Vikings excelled at burning and looting. They failed at governing. Every settlement they established either collapsed or assimilated into local culture. When William the Conqueror invaded England in 1066, he was technically Viking by descent, but culturally French. The Norse had vanished into the very civilizations they once terrorized. The Viking Age ended not with a battle, but with baptism. Christianity offered structure, law, and centralized power. The warrior culture that thrived on chaos could not compete with the organizational strength of European kingdoms. You cannot raid your way to an empire. The Berserkers. They fought without armor, without fear, without sanity. Berserkers were the Viking shock troops who entered a trance-like fury before battle. Clad only in bear or wolf pelts, they charged enemy lines, howling and biting their shields. Witnesses claimed they became immune to pain, ignoring wounds that would drop normal men. Historians debate whether the rage came from ritual, psychoactive mushrooms, or pure adrenaline. The result was the same: utter, uncontrollable violence. In the chaos of a Viking raid, Berserkers were devastating. They broke shield walls through sheer ferocity, terrified defenders into retreat, created openings for disciplined warriors to exploit. But on a structured battlefield, they became liabilities. Berserkers fought without formation, could not be commanded, and after the rage subsided, they collapsed from exhaustion, vulnerable to any counterattack. They were shock weapons, not soldiers. Useful for 10 minutes of carnage and worthless for everything else. When Christianity spread through Scandinavia, berserkers were banned. The church saw them as demonic. Viking warlords saw them as unpredictable. By the 12th century, the berserker had disappeared, remembered only in sagas as relics of a more savage age. Rage is not a sustainable military doctrine. The Jomsvikings. Not all Vikings were barbarians. Some built a brotherhood. The Jomsvikings were a military order founded in the 10th century, operating from a fortress on the Baltic coast. They accepted only proven warriors, shared all plunder equally, swore never to retreat, lived communally with no families, no personal wealth, and absolute loyalty to the code. They were mercenaries who fought for Nordic kings but answered to no crown. At the Battle of Horungavagar in 986 AD, the Jomsvikings faced overwhelming Norwegian forces. Outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and surrounded, they fought to the last man. Captured survivors were executed one by one. According to the sagas, each warrior died without fear, insulting their executioners even as the axe fell. The Norwegians were so disturbed they released the final prisoners out of respect. But honor has a cost. The Jomsviking code forbade retreat even when retreat was tactically sound. It forbade negotiation even when negotiation could save lives. By the 12th century, the order had vanished. Some historians believe they were absorbed into Christian military orders like the Teutonic Knights. Others think they simply died fighting battles they refused to abandon. The Jomsvikings proved that discipline could transform Vikings into something greater, but their suicidal devotion ensured that greatness would not last. A code that demands death guarantees extinction. The Knights Templar. They were monks who fought like demons and bankers who funded kingdoms. The Knights Templar were founded in 1119 to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, wearing white mantles emblazoned with red crosses. But unlike other monks, they carried swords. At their peak, the Templars commanded 20,000 members and controlled 870 castles across Europe and the Holy Land. They were elite cavalry, feared in battle for their discipline and refusal to retreat, but their real innovation was financial. The Templars created an early banking system, allowing pilgrims to deposit money in Europe and withdraw it in Jerusalem. They issued letters of credit, managed royal treasuries, and became so wealthy they loaned money to kings. That wealth destroyed them. King Philip IV of France owed the Templars a fortune. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, he ordered the arrest of every Templar in France. They were tortured into confessing heresy, witchcraft, and blasphemy. The order was disbanded in 1312. Their wealth was seized. Their leaders were burned at the stake. Historians estimate the Templars held assets worth hundreds of millions in today's currency. Philip took it all. The Knights Templar fell not on the battlefield, but in a throne room. Military power is useless against political conspiracy. The sword cannot defend against betrayal. The samurai. For 700 years, they ruled Japan. Then modernity arrived, and they vanished in a generation. The samurai were Japan's feudal warrior class, bound by Bushido, a code that valued loyalty above life itself. They trained from childhood in swordsmanship, archery, horseback riding, and martial philosophy. Clad in yoroi armor and wielding the curved katana, they served feudal lords with absolute devotion. To die in battle was honorable. To surrender was unthinkable. Failure demanded seppuku, ritual suicide, to preserve honor. At their peak, samurai repelled 2 Mongol invasions in the 13th century, aided by typhoons the Japanese called kamikaze, divine winds. They dominated Japanese politics, culture, and warfare for centuries. But in 1868, the Meiji Restoration modernized Japan overnight. The emperor abolished the feudal system, created a conscript army armed with rifles, and outlawed the carrying of swords. The samurai resisted. In 1877, the Satsuma Rebellion saw 40,000 samurai charge modern artillery with katanas and spears. They were annihilated. Historians estimate that 90% of the rebel samurai died in weeks. The survivors were integrated into the new army or faded into civilian life. Bushido could not stop bullets. Honor could not defeat industrialization. The warrior class that shaped Japan for centuries disappeared because the world moved faster than tradition could adapt. Evolution waits for no one. The Waffen SS. Elite, fanatical, criminal. The Waffen SS were Nazi Germany's ideological warriors, recruited based on racial purity and physical perfection. They swore personal loyalty to Adolf Hitler, not to Germany. Trained beyond the standards of the regular Wehrmacht, they fought with suicidal aggression on every front of World War II. Their casualty rates were catastrophic. Some divisions lost 90% of their strength in single campaigns, but they kept fighting. They were also war criminals. The Waffen SS committed massacres, executed prisoners, and participated in genocide. After the war, the entire organization was declared criminal by the Nuremberg trials. Historians estimate that Waffen SS units were responsible for tens of thousands of civilian deaths across Europe. Their military effectiveness is undeniable. Their moral legacy is irredeemable. The Waffen SS proved that discipline, training, and fanaticism can create devastating soldiers. But soldiers without ethics are not warriors, they are monsters in uniform. The Waffen SS remind us that military excellence means nothing without moral accountability. Skill without honor is savagery. The Finnish Snipers. In the winter of 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland with 750,000 troops. Finland had 300,000. The war should have ended in days. It lasted 105. Finnish soldiers, many of them farmers and hunters, used skis, camouflage, and Mosin Nagant rifles without scopes to wage guerrilla warfare in sub-zero temperatures. They struck from the forests, vanished into snowdrifts, and left Soviet columns frozen and leaderless. The most famous was Simo Häyhä, the White Death, credited with over 500 kills in under 100 days. Historians estimate the Soviets suffered 5 to 7 casualties for every Finnish loss. The Winter War ended with Finland ceding territory but preserving independence. The world watched in shock as a tiny nation humiliated a superpower through superior tactics, terrain knowledge, and sheer determination. But courage alone could not win. Finland lacked the supplies, manpower, and industrial base to sustain prolonged war. The Soviets regrouped, overwhelmed Finnish defenses through brute numbers, and forced surrender. Finland survived, but at devastating cost. The Finnish snipers proved that skill and resolve can defy overwhelming odds, but in modern warfare, logistics and resources ultimately decide victory. Heroism can delay defeat, but it cannot guarantee survival. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See what's next. From the Praetorian Guard who became kingmakers to the Zulu Impis who held back empires, history is filled with warriors who changed the world. We're just getting started.